Madam Chair, members of the Commission, we're now live.
Good evening and welcome to the March 12th, 2025 meeting of the Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commission. My name is Karen Burdett and I am the chair. I will now ask the commissioners and staff to introduce themselves, beginning on my left.
Michael Galway.
Zara Nasser.
Jeffrey Haynes. Mark Dominiani.
Commissioner Doman.
Julie Pelletier.
Cristina Arado.
Rebecca Ballo, Historic Preservation Staff.
John Lieberts, Historic Preservation Staff.
Serena Bolliger, Historic Preservation Staff.
Thank you. We're going to change up the sequence tonight for the agenda as opposed to what's been printed out. And we're going to start with our consent agenda for hops because we have no hops to hear tonight. And that way anybody who's here for hop will get out of here quickly. So have the hops been duly advertised?
Yes, Madam Chair, they were advertised in the February 26th edition of the Washington Times.
Thank you. If anyone is here to testify for any of the cases, please give a speaker form to the staff and let us know you're here to address the cases. Otherwise, we are going to begin by expediting the cases that we believe can be expedited based on the staff reports. Is there anyone here to speak in opposition to case number 2A at 7324 Piney Branch Road, Tacoma Park, 2B at 7210 Willow Avenue, Tacoma Park, 2C at 9915 Capitol View Avenue, Silver Spring, 2D at 15W West Irving Street, Chevy Chase, 2E at 4E Kirk Street, Chevy Chase, 2F at 4140 Wexford Drive, Kensington, and 2G at 44 Columbia Avenue, Tacoma Park, and 2I at 10114 Day Avenue, Silver Spring.
Madam Chair, hearing no objections, I move that we approve the following historic area work permits in accordance with staff reports based upon the record before us in consideration of the recommendations of local advisory panels and including the conditions recommended by staff. Hop number 1104357 at 7324 Piney Branch Road, Tacoma Park. Hop number 1104265 at 7210 Willow Avenue, Tacoma Park. Hop number 1105441 at 9915 Capitol View Avenue, Silver Spring. Hop number 1105875 at 15 West Irving Street, Chevy Chase. Hop number 1106063 at 4 East Kirk Street, Chevy Chase. Hop number 1106216 at 4140 Wexford Drive, Kensington. Hop number 1088772 at 44 Columbia Avenue, Tacoma Park. And hop number 1097479 retroactive at 10114 Day Avenue, Silver Spring.
Thank you. Is there a second to this motion?
This is Commissioner Nasser. I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
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 Are there any nays or abstentions? No, then this motion is passed. Thank you to all applicants who made these hops easy to approve and, thank you. We will now move back to item 1, a public hearing and work session on Charles M. King Farm. Is there a staff report?
There is. Good evening, Serena Bolliger, Cultural Resource Planner for the record. The purpose of tonight's hearing and work session is for the Historic Preservation Commission to evaluate the Charles M. King Farm, a circa 1988 Gothic Revival farmhouse in Damascus. The Commission will determine if the property satisfies designation criteria as outlined in the County Code and recommend to the Planning Board if the property should be removed from the Locational Atlas and Index of Historic Sites or listed in the Master Plan for Historic Preservation. Staff recommends that the HPC finds that the Charles King Farm lacks sufficient historic merit to satisfy the designation criteria outlined in 24A3B, Historic Resources Preservation, Montgomery County Code. And 2, recommends that the Planning Board removes the Charles M. King Farm in Damascus from the Locational Atlas and Index of Historic Sites. To start, I will provide the Commission with background information on the Locational Atlas site and its history. The Montgomery County Planning Board created the Locational Atlas in 1976. The inventory is based on a survey that focused on resources that were at least 100 years old and therefore potentially significant. These properties are partially protected from demolition and substantial alteration until the resource is evaluated for the Master Plan for Historic Preservation. The Charles M. King Farm is one of the original properties placed on the Locational Atlas. Neither staff nor the HPC have evaluated the King Farm against the designation criteria outlined in the County Code. The Planning Board can add or remove properties to this inventory continuously after a public hearing, and it does not require review by the County Council. In January 2025, the Historic Preservation Office received a HORP application to demolish the farmhouse and outbuildings associated with the Charles M. King Farmhouse Locational Atlas site at 25020 Kings Valley Road. The property owner submitted a permit to demolish the King Farm that triggers Section 24A-10, Moratorium on Alteration or Demolition. This requires the Planning Board to determine whether the historic resource will be likely designated as a historic site in the Master Plan for Historic Preservation or removed from the Atlas. If the Planning Board removes the property from the Locational Atlas, the Director of Permitting will issue the permit to demolish the building. As stipulated in the County Code, the Historic Preservation Commission will utilize the typical designation criteria for an amendment to the Master Plan for Historic Preservation in formulating their recommendation to the Planning Board. The designation criteria includes an analysis of historic and cultural significance and architectural and design significance. Now on to the staff's analysis of the property. The Charles M. King Locational Atlas site is an 87-acre site in the Kings Valley area of Damascus, located mostly southwest of the Kingstead and Kings Valley Road intersection. The historic site is known as the Charles M. King Farm, and the land was subdivided from Charles King's estate. However, the farm lot was never inhabited by Charles King, and the home was built by his son, William E. King, and is sometimes known as the William King Farm. When the site was designated in 1976, it was a single lot. Since then, the owners subdivided and sold portions of the property, resulting in the Locational Atlas now containing 5 properties, of which only one, 25020 Kings Valley Road, contains structures dating to the 19th and early 20th centuries. The Charles M. King Locational Atlas site is in red in the main image, with the subject property outlined in blue and the historic house indicated with a black arrow. The other properties within the footprint of the Locational Atlas site are Parcel 577P, owned by the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, part of the MNC-PPC-owned Little Bennett Stream Valley Park, 24950 Stringtown Road, and 24940 Stringtown Road. The 2 lots that have been carved out of the Locational Atlas site were sold before the site was designated in 1976. So moving on to the house itself. The Charles M. King Farm is a vernacular Gothic Revival styled farmhouse built circa 1888. The 2-story, 3-bay wood frame side gable house is a central cross gable typical of the style. The Gothic Revival elements of this home include a slight decorative element in the barge board on the porch and gable ends, a central cross gable with a double hung wood sash lancet window. The house is an L-shaped plan, comprised of the original side gable house with a full-width 1-story front porch and a 2-story rear L addition. The property has been vacant since at least the early 2000s and has experienced vandalism and the effects of severe overgrowth. The windows have been broken or destroyed, the siding is failing, and there's extensive graffiti. Elements such as the beadboard and porch columns are failing, and overgrowth is damaging much of the structure. This is the north elevation, and you can see the original side gable house and the 2-story rear addition. The west elevation features the gable end of the 2-story kitchen addition, the profile of a 1-story enclosed lean-to porch, and the rear elevation of the original side gable house. The south elevation consists of the gable end of the original house and the setback two-story rear L kitchen addition with its one-story enclosed porch. Toward the front of the property, there's a small one-story single-bay addition which shelters the stairs to the home's cellar. Here are some examples of the exterior condition of the property as it stands. The windows have been broken or destroyed, the siding is failing, and there's extensive graffiti. There are two outbuildings located approximately 50 feet southwest of the original house. The outbuilding closest to the house is a single-pile square-notch log shed with a rectangular plan. The floor is currently packed earth, but a previous historic preservation staff survey recorded deteriorating floor joists, which suggests there may have been a wood floor. The design of the building, proximity to the house, and lack of fenestration suggests the log outbuilding could have been a smokehouse, later repurposed as a shed. Adjacent to the log outbuilding is a front gable wood frame shed clad in vertical wooden boards. The structure has a hinged wooden central door and a corrugated metal roof. The home historically had a bank barn, which was demolished circa 2017. Presently, ruins of the stone foundation remain visible, but all other elements of the barn have been demolished. In 2007, historic preservation planner Claire Kelly surveyed the house, and a photo from the 2007 visit is visible, on the right-hand side of the slide. Here are some additional images from the 2007 visit to the property, which was vacant at the time as well. Very briefly, I will discuss the community context of the King family and the home itself. John Duckett King and Jemima Miles King established the Kingstead Farm in the early 1800s on a 256-acre site that included the subject 87-acre locational atlas site. The King family's specific use of this 87-acre portion remains unknown. John Duckett King was a tobacco farmer and relied on slave labor for the operation of the plantation. The King family members were very prominent in the community to the point that the area around the Kingstead farm grew to be known as the King's Valley. John King ran the blacksmith shop, Luther King ran the flour mill and whiskey distillery, and Edward and Charles M. King were farmers. Charles M. King bought a portion of his family's farmland from his father, including the family home known as Kingstead Farm. He died intestate on February 2nd, 1886, and his estate was put up for auction. The Charles King estate failed to sell at auction as a whole property and was subdivided in 1887. His fourth youngest son, William E. King, purchased Lot 3, consisting of 104 acres of his father's estate. This image shows that there are no noted properties, dwellings, or structures on the lot when he purchased it. William King married Anna Burdett, and they acquired a mortgage in 1888, which may have been for the construction of this home. The earliest tax assessment shows a note saying that there was $125 of value added to the property by 1892. William E. King worked as a farmer and raised cattle, including purebred Holstein calves. They exhibited at the annual county fair. The King family continued to be prominent in the local community, and their business, philanthropic and social affairs were often reported in the newspaper. William divorced Anna in 1919 and married Addie Mae Brown in 1920. In 1922, the Montgomery County Sentinel reported that the residence on the farm of William E. King had been destroyed by a fire. And however, based on the Gothic Revival style of the house, the King family likely restored the house to its original circa 1888 design, or the damage from the fire was not as severe as it was initially reported. Next, the staff evaluation and recommendation. Very briefly, I will discuss the context of the Gothic Revival houses in the county. The Gothic Revival style is a medieval-inspired response to the formal classical styles which had been popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. Common characteristics of the style include steeply pitched roofs, cross gables, decorated verge boards, pointed arch windows, vertical board and batten siding, and one-story porches supported by flattened Gothic arches. While the Gothic Revival style remained in the United States, emerged in the United States towards the mid-1800s, the style was not pervasive in Montgomery County until after the Civil War, and high-style Gothic Revival residences were rare in the county. Residents tended to adopt a simple vernacular form of the style and adorned their side gable houses with central cross gables. There are at least 20 properties, 20 Gothic Revival-styled houses individually listed in the Master Plan for Historic Preservation, including properties such as the Mendelssohn Terrace, which is one of the most elaborate examples of Gothic Revival architecture in the county, the Hyatt Jones House, which is a two-story Gothic Revival home constructed between 1866 and 1878, and the Dr. Cephas Willett House, which is believed to be the oldest remaining home in Potomac Village and has bargeboard detailing and cutwork porch brackets. The England Crown Farm includes the circa 1894 farmhouse with a pointed arch front gable window and cutwork porch brackets. The Condict House is a circa 1852 Gothic Revival house with a cross gable, which housed local Dr. Condict. These are only some of the 20 over 20 examples of individually designated properties and do not include the Gothic Revival properties designated within historic districts. The Charles M. King farmhouse is a plain vernacular example of a Gothic Revival residential style house. Popular in Montgomery County at the end of the 19th century, this style of dwelling and method of construction are widely represented in the Master Plan for Historic Preservation. The farm's existing outbuildings are utilitarian sheds repaired with various available materials. The dwelling and its extant outbuildings do not represent the work of a master and do not possess high artistic values. The home is lacking many of the elements which mark seminal Gothic Revival dwellings, such as prominent ornamental verge board and matten siding, and flattened Gothic arches. Very briefly, I will review the historical and cultural significance of William King. After the Kingstead Farm was established in the early 1800s, excuse me, the King family grew and developed in this area and were prominent in the community, to the point that the area around the Kingstead Farm grew to be known as Kings Valley. There are properties already designated to the master plan which represent the history and contribution of this family, and specifically properties connected with more prominent members of the family. The Kingstead Farm itself is a Master Plan for Historic Preservation designated resource, which has been owned by the King family for 200 years and has housed several distinguished members of this respected local family. The site has an extant farmhouse and outbuildings, including a circa 1898 bank barn, 2 dairy barns, 2 metal warehouses, and a silo. Neither William King nor his descendants were prominent among the King family or within Kings Valley. The Charles King Farm site is unremarkable given its association with the William King branch. There exist other properties associated with more prominent members of the King family, with greater context and better condition. Some of the properties designated on the Master Plan for Historic Preservation associated with the King family include the King Farm, also known as the James, Rufus, and Della King Barn. This site contains a Victorian and Gothic Revival-style farmhouse and several farm outbuildings, including a bank barn. The James Obed King House is inside the Cedar Grove Master Plan Historic District and is a Gothic Revival-style home built by James Obed King. Staff finds that the subject property does not satisfy the designation criteria for historical and cultural significance or architectural and design significance. As an architectural property with a late 1800s farmhouse and its associated outbuildings, the Charles M. King Farm is a commonplace example of a landscape typical of many generational farming families in the area. Neither the dwelling nor the extant outbuildings represent any significance as a unit that is greater than their commonplace components, and their condition prevents them from communicating individual or group distinction. Given the loss of the associated bank barn and residential redevelopment of the subdivided lots, the integrity of the Charles M. King Farm is compromised. The integrity of their home and outbuildings has been severely damaged by the loss of original historic fabric, including missing doors, destroyed windows, rotting siding, and failing structural elements. The home is an unremarkable vernacular incarnation of the Gothic Revival residential style. The dwellings, outbuildings are not remarkable or rare, and the Charles M. King Farm represents a common Montgomery County vista. Staff recommends that the Historic Preservation Commission finds that the Charles M. King Farm lacks sufficient historic merit to satisfy the designation criteria outlined in 24A-3B, Historic Resources Preservation, Montgomery County Code, and recommends that the Planning Board removes the Charles N. King Farm, 25020 Kings Valley Road, Damascus, from the Locational Atlas and Index of Historic Sites.
Thank you very much. Moving on, I'd like to invite the property owners, any municipalities or HOAs to come forward, and I understand there's Irina Hall and James Clifford to testify. If you'd please have a seat and turn on the mic so the green light comes on, and then identify yourself, and you then can give your testimony.
I'm James R. Clifford. I'm a land use attorney up county. I specialize in agriculture. Basically, I'm a farmer myself. I've represented the King family, the core central part of the historic family for the last 30 years. I've been involved in this property since 2003, and I can fill in the blanks. I wasn't there when Duckett owned it, but when Ed owned it, James Edward, as they called him Ed, that house burnt down originally, 1800 house burnt down. My source of information, other than my own experience, is that Mary King is still alive. Mary and Doug were brother, sister. They live in the main house, the one that you saw pictures of. That's where the Holstein dairy breeding operation, which was nationally known, that's where it operated out of. And Doug died a few years back. Mary stays in the house. I would have brought her with me. You would have loved to have met her, but she's just not very mobile right now. But she gave me the history, and she kept her King family history book right next to her, so to check her own facts. But she gave me she helped me fill in the timeline. And I could spend an hour, but I'm going to spend 5 minutes giving you the timeline for this property. It was built in the 1920s, or rebuilt in the 1920s by Ed. Ed was, I wouldn't call him a hired hand, but he was not central to the operation of the breeding operation there at the King's family. It was vacated as a house in 1975. That's the time that Nettie King died. Nettie was married to Ed, second wife. She stayed in there longer than she should have. Her daughter was living there at one time, moved next door, built a little rambler there, it's still there, and wanted her mother to move in with her. She wouldn't leave the house. It was well past its prime by the time that he died. And Lorraine tried to keep it up for as long as she could, but it was more than she could handle too. And so it fell into disrepair, but 1975 was the end of its occupancy. My clients were 5 gentlemen who bought it, who were just automobile mechanics, and they bought it in 2003. They came to me and said, what should we do? I'm in ag preservation. I do a lot of ag preservation. So I said, well, we'll carve off 77 acres. Called my buddy Bill Grease down at Parks, and we sat down and negotiated and sold the 77-acre, which was the cultivated land, the real area of the farm that had been farmed by Sterling King, who was a relative, and made a deal with Parks for them to buy it and allow Sterling to continue to farm it until he died, which he did. Then we subdivided it in 2007 and sold off 2 lots, one in 2014 and one in 2017. As suggested, there was a piece of property across the street, across Kings Valley Road, a small parcel that sat there with an old bank barn on it. WSSC has a pump station immediately adjacent to it, and they asked if they could buy that parcel. It was separated from everything else. So in 2015, we sold that parcel with the barn on it, still intact, but it was in bad repair. We sold it to WSSC, and WSSC learned later on after buying it that it was in a floodplain. And so they're now going up to the upper part of the King Farm on Kingstead and King Valley that is zoned for housing, not very much. And they're building a new pump station across the street from the farm area that we're going to be putting into preservation for the Kings. The piece is separated by Kings Valley Road, and that's where the new pump station is going to go. We signed a contract with the Halls to buy the property. I told them it would be subject to you all approving this property for demolition. I wouldn't sell it to somebody with the hope that it could demolish. We've never done anything with it. We've had a sign on it for 20 years saying it's for sale. I've taken 50, 60 phone calls over the years, but the house has always been the problem. Nobody knew what to do with it. And it's really not much of a house, even now. I've done a lot of preservation. This is not one of the ones I would have gone after to preserve.
Thank you. Ms. Hall, would you like to make a statement?
Good evening to the commission. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Irina Hall. My husband, Aaron, is here also. We're under contract, as he said, to purchase this property contingent on the demolition, which, as you know, triggers the removal from the location that lists an index historical site. So we've worked very closely with Ms. Ballo and the team from Montgomery County Planning Department to review the property. So should this property be removed, it's what we would like to do is demolish the structures and properly abandon the well and the septic, and then remove the potential source of contamination from the Little Bennett watershed. And we hope that we can build a single-family home at the site in accordance with the zones and permitting requirements. That's kind of our goal, walking away from this. So thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Is there anybody here from the public who would like to make a comment or speak? If not, are there any questions for the staff by the commission? Commissioner Doman?
Yeah, Mrs. Commissioner Doman. In the report, there's a picture of the house in 2007. And at that time, from the photograph, it looked like it was in very habitable condition. It looked like it was in good shape. I don't know if it was lived in at that time, but the front porch looks good, the columns look good, the siding looks good. That's 2007, so sometime between then and now, or sometime, it really fell into disrepair. And do we know, I mean, I guess it was abandoned, but there's some obligation to, when you have a property, to maintain it. You can't allow a property to deteriorate and say, well, it's so far gone, we can then let it, it's no good anymore. What do you call it? Demolition by neglect, I guess that's the word I'm looking for, demolition by neglect. Would this fall into the category of demolition by neglect?
John Lieberts, Cultural Resource Planner for the record. So for demolition by neglect, properties that are listed on the master plan are protected under the county code for historic preservation in our section of the county code that talks about demolition by neglect. Properties on the locational atlas are not inherently protected in the same way. And basically, you have to go through the process to determine, like we're doing now, whether it should be listed to the master plan. And so demolition by neglect, there's no, you know, the director of permitting services cannot order a property on the locational atlas, the homeowners to do certain things to keep it up to a certain standard. Now, as you stated, normal building code always applies, but in terms of the power given to within the historic preservation ordinance, it's not it's not the same as a master plan historic site or district or a property that's on the locational atlas, because you still need to have this process go forward and determine, yes, it's going to be listed, and only when it's listed can you take the actions for demolition by neglect.
Commissioner, if I could, I was on site in 2007 when they walked through, because we were in the process of subdividing. At that time, I was told by historic staff that they did not see it as something they would go ahead and designate. And the house was not safe on the inside. It had been condemned. I think if you go back in the record, you'd find the house was condemned at that point. It had been over 20, was almost 30 years. She left in 1975, and that was 2007. The house had been vacant all that time. There had been a lot of interior damage by vandals, but the house was not in good shape back then. My clients are, the main client has lived in Vietnam since 2010. The other gentleman in the partnership I haven't seen, but I know they're in the area because I've had from time to time to get them to sign, but there is a language problem. But it's not a house that even in 2007 that anybody would have probably rolled up their sleeves and tried to take on. There was a lot of damage. It looks good on these pictures. I probably look good in some pictures too. It was not in good shape.
I'd like to continue one more question. This was listed on the master plan, is that correct? No?
No, this was listed to the locational atlas.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to figure out, is there some obligation on historic preservation staff or the commission, when a house is listed, to at least view it once in a while to make sure that it's being maintained and not allowed to deteriorate? Is there some kind of a program where you go by and you look at these houses and say, yeah, it's okay, it's being maintained, or no, it's being neglected? I'm not familiar, so is there such a thing that staff does this?
This is Rebecca Ballo for the record. So about once a decade or once every 15 years, looking through the records, the staff have been able to do that because it is not a dedicated part of our work program with dedicated staff. At any one time, we now have 2 historians on the staff, and this is an upgrade. We used to have 1, and then it was 1.5 positions. And at any one time, they were tasked to over half a dozen master plan amendments. And then we've had our regulatory staff that, as you know, just focus on the historic area work permits. So in a lot of our yearly briefings, I do bring up the fact that we try and keep on top of the locational atlas, but to be frank, since the inception of the program in 1980, you can go back to the program records where they have updates from 1985 going, yes, we're chipping away at that locational atlas, but wow, it's taking a lot longer than we thought it would. So to be frank about it, we just don't have the staff resources to check in on these, particularly the ones that are, further apart geographically. You can take a whole day and drive around and just hit Damascus, frankly. So we don't have those resources. As John and Serena noted, the last time we were out there was in 2007. But to your earlier point too, every property owner in Montgomery County is required to meet minimum life safety, building standards for their properties. We and DPS and DHCA often operate on a complaint system. As complaints come in and are reported to the county, then we become aware of issues on site, and then we will go out and cite property owners, and put abatement orders in place. I'm not aware, nor did I see in the record anything about a condemnation order or that this went to court or, anything like that. So to your point, this is kind of a longish answer. The last time we really put eyes on this was a little less than 20 years ago.
It's demolition by vandalism.
Commissioner Radu?
Just a question about this 2007 site visit. At the time, what was really the purpose of if you know the property is on the locational atlas, isn't it the idea that if you visit it, you want to do an assessment, is it or not eligible to move it on the master plan?
Typically, yes. Yes. So this was all previous staff that were there before. I can't really comment on the priorities of the previous program staff, but when this came in because there was a subdivision case that was pending for it. The lots to the south that Mr. Clifford was talking about, those were subdivided out, and that really spurred the site visit from the staff and the consideration of the whole property, and also the issue with the land being sold to parks as well. So now, if something like that came up, we would look at the work program and see if we could make an effort to bring forward a delisting. But as you know too, it really is kind of half of a master plan amendment. So all other work program items that staff are working on need to stop for about 6 weeks while we tackle something like this. So also too, if there isn't an imminent emergency with the house or something happening, we can say, well, it's just a subdivision. That's not a substantial alteration to this house, and then other things come up. But yes, in terms of program priorities for the office, we should be bringing these forward regularly to the commission when things like subdivisions happen.
Sorry, Serena Bollinger for the record also. In this case, they were reviewing properties they were doing like a study for the Damascus Goshen master plan in 2008, and they ended up doing the boundary of the master plan on the road just north of the property. So they were surveying many properties and then decided to exclude it, and that's why it was never reviewed as part of the master plan.
Are there any other questions for Staff? If not, then we can start our consideration as a commission related to this property. Would anybody like to begin? I will begin. It's interesting, we just recently had another case of a building removed from the locational atlas. Now, that one was a log cabin, and the owner, they found out about it when the owner started to demo the house, the log cabin, and start building the house on top of it without a permit. And DPS found out about it and alerted us. But by that point, all integrity of that log cabin was gone. In this case, the house has fallen into serious disrepair and, from the report, serious structural disrepair. And to return it to its prior condition would be a very expensive exercise to build a farmhouse, an old farmhouse. And as staff has said, it does not have any historic merit, outstanding historic merit, and it does not have any outstanding architectural merit compared to other very similar properties within the same family and within the county. It is always a shame to lose a property. I'm frankly surprised this one didn't burn down sometime in the last 20 years from.
Wasn't there fire at some point?
The house burned in 1920s, or in the late teens, early 20s, and was rebuilt. But once a house is vacant for that amount of time, and it's worth considering that when a house is vacant with no heat and no condition, and there's any leaks in the roof, and the windows have been broken out, and you do have vandals in there breaking down or wearing down all the interiors, that a house will decay very quickly, and particularly if overgrowth is occurring adjacent to it. And again, these are all unfortunate circumstances, and it's very unfortunate that our locational atlas is quite extensive, and we don't have the staff to monitor all the properties that are on it in the same manner that we monitor designated properties. So my opinion, and I'll let the other commissioners speak, but my opinion is I concur with staff that this house no longer meets the design criteria or the designation criteria and should be removed from the locational atlas. Commissioner Doman, you have comment?
Yeah, not to double up on it, but I agree wholeheartedly with the staff recommendations that the Charles M. King House be removed from the locational atlas and index of historic sites. So I support what we're doing here. That's all.
Does Commissioner Galway?
I just, excuse me, Commissioner Galway, I'd want to be clear here that when we say that it lacks sufficient historical merit to satisfy the designation, I'm unfortunately in a situation where I have to agree. But I don't want that to be misconstrued as we don't think that this particular home, Gothic Revival Farmhouse, has enough sufficient historical merit in of itself. If this home was in pristine condition, and it's not, but if it was in a pristine condition, we wouldn't be here today saying, let's take this house down. It's obviously, there's so little historic fabric left that that by the time you rebuilt it, you're pretending, right? You're trying to build something that looks like something that it isn't, or that it was, but that it's not the same materials, even if we went to the trouble and the extreme cost to try to replace all of the existing materials with matching materials. It would be extensively expensive, extremely expensive, and it really would not be the historic home that it should be. So it tears me up because even though it may not be a Gothic revival like some of the other examples, I see the beauty in it, and unfortunately the time has gotten to the point. It's gotten to the point due to the just inability to maintain it over the years that it's in the situation that it is. So unfortunately, in this case, I do support it, support the staff's recommendations, but I do so begrudgingly. Thank you.
Are there any other comments? I would like to make one quick question of the staff. There's no need to do any sort of archaeological survey. There's no expectation that anything would be out there considering the age of the house postdates the Civil War by a considerable amount, correct?
Serena Bolger, for the record, we spoke with our on-staff archaeologist, Brian Crane, and he, based on his review of the land, didn't think that there was anything in particular that the house would render, and especially given the fact that it was fairly recent to the King family tenure on the land, and the cemetery is associated with the Kingstead farmhouse, so we know it's already on a separate site, and we know where the family members are buried. And in addition to that, I also checked with the park staff about any archaeological import that maybe they might have come across in doing some research there, and they said that they had done a number of surveys in the MNC-PPC park site that is part of the Stream Valley, and they said there was nothing that came up in their research.
Thank you very much. You've done a very thorough job on your research and on the report. Appreciate it. All right. If there are no more comments, we make a motion. Okay. I make a motion that the commission, I guess somebody else has to do this, right?
No, you can, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make sure, yes, you have the slide up in front of you with the staff recommendation for the motion.
Okay. I make a motion that the commission find that the Charles M. King Farm lacks sufficient historic merit to satisfy the designation criteria outlined in 24A 3B, Historic Resources Preservation for Montgomery County Code, and that the commission recommends that the planning board removes the Charles M. King Farm at 25020 Kings Valley Road, Damascus, from the locational atlas and index of historic sites.
Commissioner Haynes, I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any nays or abstentions? There are not. Then this motion passes, and staff will prepare the recommendation for the planning board.
Yes, Madam Chair, the staff report for the planning board will post this week. The planning board public hearing for this is scheduled for next Thursday, and Ms. Bolger can talk with you about how you can sign up to testify for that hearing as well if you're interested in participating in that one too, and talk with you about your next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Clifford. Mr. Clifford, I would like to thank you for the additional history that you provided. It was very interesting, so thank you. All right, moving on. We are going to have a discussion about the draft illustrated guidelines for porch and deck flooring after much delay.
Good evening, Dan Bruckert for the record. So I've worked on some preliminary text for the guidelines that will be formatted and illustrated later on. This text is generally consistent with the policy that was adopted by the HPC, and we're happy to talk about either issues globally or specific text alterations. I'm working with Devin Murtha and our staff to work on doing some preliminary layout, both of the text and the illustrations, and we hope to bring that to you at a future meeting before too terribly long. And we can just open it up at this point.
All right. Does Do any of the commissioners have any comments? I know Commissioner Doman does, but would anybody else like to have a shot at this first? Commissioner Galway.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Galway. I suppose for the record, do I need to enter just grammatical issues, or can that be done offline, or?
So, I mean, those can be done offline, and this is still an iterative process, and this is sort of the first pass through staff, so is still some significant wordsmithing that's going on. But if you have specific, words or phrases that you'd like to have included in there, we're receptive to that also.
Okay, fair enough. Some of these I'm not going to bother talking about this evening, but I do have one question under the section entitled pressure-treated and heat-treated wood. There's a second paragraph that says finishing pressure-treated and heat-treated wood differs by manufacturer, and applicants are encouraged to contact a representative of the manufacturer before applying for the hop. And I understand the sentence. I'm just not sure what is the recommendation for that individual to reach out to that manufacturer to do what, so that was the question that I had.
Yeah, I think that in some cases, I mean, I guess the collection of both pressure-treated and heat-treated or acetylated products is so broad. Some of those will take a finish, some of them won't. Some of them have to wait until they've sufficiently dried out to take a finish. So it really is determined. It's depending on what's been done to that wood will direct what the best practice is on the part of the applicant. So some of that is dictated purely by the product and its method and what's recommended or what will be what won't void the warranty. A lot of the heat-treated woods, they become so dense that they just won't take any finish aside from oil. So, we wouldn't recommend that anybody paint that because the paint won't adhere and it won't benefit the material at all. So it really is dependent on what that specific material is. As a treated product, that will differ by product.
Okay, so it's really to reach out to a representative to get help from them as to whether or not the product would be suitable for whatever.
And identify the best treatment for it.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Under the paragraph policy, let me see if I remember. For what we identify here for outstanding or primary resources, let me remember my notes here. The resources are the most significant, obviously, and we would want wood to be used on all porches and decks installed in an appropriate method. Under contributing resources below that, we are a little more lenient in non-historic rear porches and so forth. Is it the intent that under the outstanding or primary resources that if there is a non-historic addition that was added to the home at some point in the rear, that we would require that to be wood in lieu of an alternate material?
So the language of the policy is that wood on primary and outstanding resources, full stop. Now, the policy also says that all hops are considered on a case-by-case basis. So, there wasn't a carve-out for new construction to those buildings in the text of the policy itself.
Okay. All right. The other comments were just grammatical, and we can take that offline.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments? If not, we will go right on to Commissioner Doman. Oh, Commissioner Pelletier.
I think sort of along the lines of what you were just talking about, the word appropriate, I thought was super vague.
Okay.
Is that intentional? I mean, and I understand why it might be, because it's kind of it's a tough topic.
I mean, I'll
Ken?
happily volunteer that that's a clumsy sentence just to begin with. But so sort of the little bit of the wordsmithing that I was doing, just changing that language, the HPC determined the appropriateness of employing or using or installing substitute materials. So it's, I mean, you know, the language of the policy itself, let me pull that up.
Well, I was looking at the outstanding and primary resources where it says wood should be used on all porches and decks installed in an appropriate method.
So,
So that and I mean, yes, that's right. But I don't know, do we want to get more specific, or I understand why we're trying to keep this kind of
well, so I mean,
loose.
further down, there is a small section on installation where porches should, you know, porches have tongue and groove flooring with the
Yeah.
boards installed perpendicular to the wall plane, you know, and a finished edge. I mean, we could also talk about negative slope as part of that. But so that's, when we're
Yeah.
talking about appropriateness, we're sort of talking about those guidelines
Okay,
for proper floorboard installation.
okay.
Part of that too, as we're working on the illustrated portion of this, similar to what we did with the solar panel design guidelines, where we had a lot of representative examples, like install it like this, don't do it like this, do it like this, don't do it like this. And then the captions will speak further to the appropriateness of each of those sort of installation and finishing methods for the examples.
Okay, yeah, I think that will,
So there may be like
Clear
a
it up.
C figure for,
right.
for appropriate installation.
Okay, that's fine, thanks.
I have this is Commissioner or Chair Burdett. I have a question kind of following up on that a little bit. As we move forward in time, we do know of a mid-century house that is designated, that is having work done on it. We may run into properties that don't have tongue and groove. At that point, will we have enough flexibility with this to handle more modern, contemporary, mid-century properties?
I mean, at the end of the day, all of the hops have to satisfy the criteria of 24A and the Secretary of the Interior standards, and if there are any local, you know, district-specific guidance associated with that. And I think that's sort of where appropriate, in quotes, comes in, it being installed in an appropriate method comes into play, because in that instance, it wouldn't be architecturally compatible to require a tongue and groove installation where it was, you know, decking board spaced a quarter inch to half an inch.
Yeah.
So that's where we would encourage them to replicate that detail. And that tongue and groove may be an inappropriate material, or an inappropriate installation method.
Thank you. Commissioner Doman, do you have any comments?
I really don't know what to say, this whole thing. I had a lot of thoughts when the original policy came out, and I guess I'd say I'm a big proponent of using more modern materials, because I think there's a lot of products that are out there that are architecturally and visually identical to what you know, maintaining historic presence on a house. So I would like to see us be more lenient and allowing other materials to be brought into play. I guess what I had was some of my, I wrote up a little summary here back on January 22nd. One of my questions is getting clear differentiation between what a compatible substitute material is and a substitute material. How are they distinguished and how are they different?
So that's, I mean, that's defined in the policy, or what a compatible substitute material is taken directly from the policy. So what we have, you know, in the policy, it states a compatible substitute material for replacement porch flooring and decking. It must match the dimensions and installation method of the existing material or a historically appropriate porch flooring. It must be millable. It it must be paintable without voiding the product warranty, or it has a uniform appearance consistent with painted wood, and it has minimal or no stamped or embossed texture on the surface, and it has a finished edge that appears as a solid cut board. So those are the criteria that were adopted in the policy for what constitutes a compatible substitute material.
And a substitute material is
Anything,
anything else?
yeah, effectively. So it doesn't have, it can have a more deeply embossed texture on the surface. It can be modeled rather than have a uniform appearance. So in developing the policy, the subcommittee broke down sort of the characteristics that they wanted to see that were closest to wood, but were still PVC or composite, that would basically hold those properties to a slightly higher standard based on the material, while providing more flexibility on non-original materials.
Like I said, I just find this whole thing more burdensome than it needs to be. I mean, when you say it has to be wood, I mean, it would seem to me that wood would exclude non-historic woods that, if you have a historic house and the guidelines say that it has to be done in wood, I would think it should exclude teak and should exclude mahogany and should exclude sapele. I don't see where those would be considered appropriate wood for a historic house.
Well, I mean, again, these are interpreting the policy position that was voted on by the entire HPC. So this is not a reinterpretation or a rewriting of that. And in that policy, the HPC adopted that all wood is going to be considered wood, and it wouldn't be species specific, in the same way that it would treat pressure-treated wood as wood, or those thermally modified or acetylated wood products as wood, not a substitute material. So that's just, as a definition, that's in the policy.
Like I said, I really don't know what to say on this whole thing. One thing that I did back in February of 2024, there was a webinar, online briefing that was presented by the authors of Technical Brief 16, John Sander, David Tracy, anyway, these people. So I sat in on that. I don't know, maybe other people did on this thing, but they did differentiate, and maybe this is semantics on their part, but these acetylated wood, pressure-treated wood, they did not consider that wood. They called that modified wood.
Mm-hmm.
They used a tag in front of it, I think. So when we say pressure-treated wood would be okay, that's not wood, that's a modified wood. Is that, well, apparently that's okay.
Right. The definition that was adopted by the HPC under this policy considers it wood. So there are additional considerations for installing pressure-treated wood in this. For example, usually the requirement is that it has to dry out for 6 months before it will take a finish. And that is one of the things that the HPC was willing to consider in adopting this policy. Now, yes, the National Park Service identified those as modified wood, but I also know that in the case of tax credit review at the National Park Service, they would consider wood species as part of that. They would go much deeper than the flexibility that the HPC is showing and allowing consideration of all wood species as wood. So we're not getting into the weeds quite so much as the Park Service does in those kinds of elements.
Yeah, I realize we have this is the, I guess you call it guidelines, and we have what do you call it, a position paper, whatever you want to call it for this, and was there some discussion that that this paper, our, what do you call it, policy, the policy on this thing would be reviewed in 2 years or come up again for review, so we could talk about this again?
Yeah, I think it was part of the motion that adopted this.
Yeah.
So again, the purpose of these illustrated guidelines is to provide something a little more digestible and that provides guidance to people who can pull this up on our website or have a printed copy. But yes, as part of the policy adoption, there was we'll review this, I believe it was 18 months or 2 years. Once there were sufficient numbers of porches installed that we could revisit in due course.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that was discussed in one of the later sessions in developing the policy was that it was better to start from a more restrictive position and potentially ease up the policy rather than start with a more lax position and have to tighten it up, finding that you've gone too far in relaxing that, and that there are materials that were not compatible that have really had a negative impact on the resource or the district.
I have, and this is basically kind of a minor detail, but we have put in this adoption that when you have a board like on a step, the end of it should appear to be a board, right? On thing. But this little thing that I wrote up back in January, and I have some samples with me, regular oak flooring or anything else you would buy, poplar flooring or whatever you want to do for a porch, they do have the reliefs on the bottom are cut into it. So that one statement is a little bit too, maybe not quite right. They leave that in there like that.
Okay.
Because real wood flooring would have a cut pattern on the bottom.
Cut out to relieve it from cupping, yeah.
Yeah. And that's understandable, but
Yeah.
the way we worded it doesn't quite cover that.
But again, I'll point out figures 2 and 3 in that, in what was distributed to the commissioners as sort of preliminary images, and I have a hard copy, is not that. It's substantially deeper and.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that because that shows the open PVC or composite material, not the finished end, it sort of adds to that. Where if you have, oak that can be painted and should be painted, you won't have the open grain ends showing at the edge of the porch because the surface would be painted.
Yeah. Like I said, I tend to be more open and more liberal for interpretation of some of these things, and I would assume we're going to review some of this again in another year, because we have 1 year behind us now, and I'd look forward to working on it in another year. I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, that's up to the commission. We're just here to staff you and provide our expertise. And again, part of that was just waiting until there was sufficient there had been sufficient numbers of these projects that had come in that we were able to revisit, and there just haven't been to this point.
Yeah, I just think we need to open up and allow more of these synthetic materials that look good. You can't tell them from the street if they're real wood or not real wood. I think we just need to be a little bit more flexible in some of our interpretations, and that's more or less where I come from and what my discussion would be. But I have nothing else to say on this.
Yeah, Commissioner Doman, thank you for your opinions. Commissioner Pelletier.
On that note, I think.
Your mic's off, Julie.
This is Commissioner Pelletier. I think when we had the discussions, when we were meeting as subcommittee, there were definitely things that we did not want. And I think you've really started to establish those in these graphics. Like, I think in our conversations, and we did have this back and forth about the actual material, but there are conditions that are not acceptable. And whether it's made out of wood or it's made out of synthetic, like, we're not going to accept this end condition on these stair treads. We're not going to accept a heavy embossed, Trex-type product with the same embossing every 36 inches. Like, there's some basic things that are not going to work for these historic properties in these master plan sites. And I think approaching it, the text is sufficiently vague, I think, but I think approaching it from a graphic standpoint and saying, this is what we don't want, is just based on these few graphics that you have in here, I think is very effective. And I think we did talk during our committee meetings about the fact that it's going to be a case-by-case basis, and the owners are going to be able to come and state their case and why they think their product is acceptable. And you've laid out very clear reasons for things that are not acceptable. And I think that's a good place to go from, I mean, I agree with James on that, I think at some point we're probably going to start being more flexible as products are getting better. But right now, the fact that we're just trying to, sort of help this along and give us some kind of guidelines, I think this is a very good start.
Well, and just to reiterate, I mean, we created a standard for what that material was. We didn't say, use this material. And as manufactured products, there's more stuff coming out all of the time. So hopefully we'll get more things that are constructed to that standard and
yeah, that meet the criteria that are listed.
We can bring those in as well.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner Pelletier. Any other comments? Commissioner Galway.
I just wanted, this is Commissioner Galway, but what we have for the outstanding and primary resources, we said wood. So when you say we haven't defined the material, in some cases we are defining the material. And I guess I think I just wanted to make that point, is that we're not allowing, unless it was some sort of plea to the commission to use some other alternative material in an outstanding resource. We would expect it to be wood, and what we've already said is it could be any number of different wood species or finishes or pressure treated, and that we would accept that based on our previous recommendation.
Well, per the policy, yes, but it also, I mean, again, every hop is judged on its own merit. So there may be certain circumstances or conditions that require, or that, lead you to conclude that in this instance, it would either be better for the resource to adopt a compatible substitute material, or in this instance, a compatible substitute material wouldn't detract from the character. So there may be certain circumstances where that was deemed to be acceptable, but again, it should be wood. I mean, it doesn't say must or in every case, and we use that language to provide the commission with enough wiggle room that there may be instances where something else is acceptable.
That makes sense, thanks.
And it may be, sorry to cut you off, Commissioner Radu, it may be a, you know it when you see it kind of a thing, and we just don't, we can't think of every instance of where something might come up, so we just need to provide that flexibility to the commissioners as part of that as well.
Yeah, I think we're circling around the fact that there's what it looks like and what it's made of. And I think in many cases, and I think the examples of figure 3 or whatever, it doesn't look like wood, it looks ridiculous, So, in a situation like that, it doesn't really matter. If that was made out of wood and looked like that, we wouldn't have seen it 120 years ago. We wouldn't have allowed it either, whether it was the best wood product in the world. So I think it's what it looks like, and then you have to really pay a close attention to what it's made of. And in some situations, we're going to allow that substitute, and in other situations, we're just not going to. Thank you.
Any other comments? If not, Commissioner Radu, yes, sorry.
I just want to just some clarifications for the purpose of this. I mean, we voted on the policy before, so we already accepted what we do for the outstanding, for all the others. So this one is just to kind of show, yeah, it's a little more descriptive for the general public.
Yes.
And this is also setting the policy for what the staff will approve without, if they meet this criteria, the staff will approve these things without coming in front of the commission.
So if it's a change in material, it still has to come before the HPC. What you have seen in some staff reports where there have been porch replacements is that just provides us additional guidance in the analysis section of the staff report. In some cases, it makes it really easy because, you know, if it's a non-contributing resource and they want to put in basically anything, the policy says that they can do that. So it's just another sort of persuasive source that we can use in our analysis section that does make the outcome much more predictable.
I just have one more follow-up question. Well, if this is for replacing porch materials, yeah, this does not apply to new porches, additions. I mean, like, because we have, like, for example, for outstanding building, if nobody sees it's out of the way, and I know that I'm not talking about the policy we voted.
Right.
I mean, if it comes individually, we can vote on replacement material, I mean, not replacement, a new material to be used, yeah, potentially for that, then that actually probably not being, I know that I totally dislike the figure 3 material. However, if it's like I mean, I can tell it's new, so it will not be any compatibility or incompatibility. That will really be stated that this is a new addition, you know, like if it's even on an outstanding building outside the.
So there is some flexibility inherent in that, but you also, as a body, wouldn't approve vinyl siding on an addition to an outstanding resource either. So there has to be considerations of compatibility of the finish and the material and its design and all of those things. So, you know, the commission could decide that this is a location where, you know, a substitute material that meets the criteria for compatibility, you know, a compatible substitute material is acceptable even on an outstanding resource or a master plan site. But I think that's a case-by-case basis, but we hold people to higher standards all the time, you know, in siding and windows and all sorts of materials where, so that wouldn't be unusual.
This Commissioner, I'd like to add a comment, please. I think it's worth, I mean, we've done a lot of work on this, multiple meetings to get to the policy that is drafted now. And the graphics are going to be very helpful because we're doing this for the public and for ourselves and for the staff. And I also think it's worth keeping in mind with all these new products that are coming out constantly, that it is, in my opinion, better to give them some time to age as a usable product on the marketplace, and to let their warranties be used a little bit, because a lot of products, you know, in hindsight, a lot of products in the last 50 years came out that were wonder products. And they failed spectacularly in some cases, and some just failed miserably. And, I mean, I think of one would be on churches in schools that put, plexiglass sheets over their windows to protect them, and they all fogged up and looked terrible, and the expense was they were too expensive to replace with something better or glass, so they just stayed there for decades and decades and decades. I think it's worth being a little cautious with this. And we're not talking waiting 20 years. We are talking about waiting 2 years and maybe another 2 years to see if some of these new heat-treated products actually are going to stand the test of time and are worth reconsidering. Going all the way to plastic, I'm not sure we may ever get there, at least not this commission, but it's out there in the future for a future commission to consider. But I think we've made a step forward, and it's a cautious step, and I think that's appropriate for this commission. Because every commission, every group of people, and we'll probably all switch out around the same time, and a new commission will come in with its new attitudes. And if every new commission radically changed their position, then you kind of have to wonder what becomes of what our core mission is on this commission. So I support this. I think the graphics are fine. I'm sure there's some wordsmithing that can be done, but at least it will give applicants coming to the staff, they will be told clearly what they have to comply with. And if they want an exception, then we will be told we can advise them clearly on what the parameters are. And in 2 years, we can also revisit some of these materials or this entire policy. Commissioner Doman?
Not much more to add. I would like to see us retackle this whole thing in a year or two. But anyway, I have a few grammatical things.
Me too.
Minor, okay, a few minor
too.
things that I'm not going to waste any time here. So I can email you or send you a markup sheet, okay? I'll do it that way.
Okay, so you've heard our comments, and you are good with that for now?
Yes,
And you'll deal
and
with-
I think in probably 3 meetings' time, we hope to have a mock-up with some more, refined text and additional photographs. It's been, in some cases, for some of these products, it's been hard to chase down, especially in instances where, the bad examples are the easy ones to find. It's actually the better ones that have been trickier. So we're still working on those and hope to have some of those incorporated in the next draft.
Commissioner Dolan, briefly, please.
Yeah, briefly. I have a whole slew of samples, right? I've got the
Commissioner
Acre and
Dolan?
AZAC, okay? I think it might be useful if I could take my samples, put them together, and mount them on a board and say, this is a product, so people can see, besides having a picture of it, they could actually see an actual sample of what we would like or wouldn't like.
Yes, we can definitely do that. Dan has a lot of samples in his office too, so we can create something like
Yeah.
a product
Library.
board.
A
Yeah.
product board, so
Yeah.
people can see, and then obviously the one that's got the big grooves on the bottom, that's obvious, okay, we're not gonna improve that. But I think there's a lot of other variations in there that actual samples that you can hold in your hand would be usful. I'd like
It'd
to
be
see that.
another way to lure people to our office in person. No, thank you for that. Definitely, we should do that.
Well, thank you, staff, for this exhaustive report, and we appreciate it very much. Moving on to minutes. Did anybody read the minutes this time, please? Anybody?
This is Commissioner Dimignani. I read both sets of minutes and found them to be great, so I would make a motion that we approve, unless anyone objects, the minutes for February 18th and for February 26th as written.
Do I have a second?
It's Commissioner Haynes, I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 I don't think there's a commission item, but I believe there are staff items.
There are staff items. So as I mentioned during the work session, staff is going to start keeping the commissioners apprised of cases that we have actively going forward to district court, and then also giving you verbal updates on new enforcement actions. These are for a mix of master plan sites and historically designated properties within historic districts. This is not everything that we're currently working on with DPS and DHCA in terms of violations, but what we have for you tonight are updates on things that are going to district court next Tuesday, as well as newly filed cases. So at every agenda, we will update you with newly filed cases and then let you know if we have a pending district court action in the next 2 weeks.
In the work session or in the hearing?
In the hearing.
Oh, okay.
So in the work session, I just said, we're going to start doing this from now on, but then I'd like to have this as part of the record for every public hearing. So if commissioners are absent too, they can rewatch the video and get updates that way.
Can you view it live? The
District
case?
court?
Yeah,
No.
no. But you said if you're making us aware that it's going to happen. We could attend it,
You could if you
but I
wanted to.
I can't sit at home and watch it.
No,
Okay.
no, you can't. You'd have to attend district court, which, if you want to attend district court, we'd be glad to have you, but it's a little boring. So what we'll do is we're just going to go through each case and sort of tell you what's going on with those and have each staff member involved, kind of give you a really brief update. So we're going to start with 9220 Damascus Hills Lane, which is the Resin Bowman Farm.
This is Laura DiPasquale with the staff. This case is several years old. It's essentially a demolition by neglect sort of
It's an
case, an
it's
abatement
abatement.
case, where a number of exterior and probably interior work needs to be done to the property. The current owners purchased it last year or 2 years ago?
Last year, within the last 6 months.
Yeah, and are working with us sort of slowly to bring the property into compliance.
Any questions about that one? We had heard a hop for that several years ago. A young couple had brought forward a case to do this as a passive house, a greenhouse. They were in the military and then they were transferred. So they transferred and sold the property. So as soon as it was sold to a new owner, we had to reissue the abatement order. So Laura's been working really closely with them, but there's been no action on that yet. The entire house has been gutted and is vacant. So there are no working windows, there are no working doors, there are no floors, there are no systems, there is nothing left in the house aside from the frame of it. It's all boarded up, and the porch is still there, too. Kind of.
So what's the order? For them to tear it down?
No,
For
no,
them-
no. So the abatement order, the county is seeking remediation of the abatement, or we intend to seek remediation of the abatement. They are required to bring the house back into
Back to
working
code.
order,
Okay.
back up to code, and that's their intent to do that as well. But the abatement order is so this doesn't sit for another period of years, because it's in violation of the county housing codes in the state
okay.
that it's in. So even if this weren't a historic property,
Right.
the county would be pursuing abatement. So abatement can be achieved, sometimes you remove the violation by demolishing the property. When it's a historic property, then we move forward to have the judge issue orders that the property must be rehabilitated. And we set certain timeframes and ask for fines, and we march the owner towards compliance, which is the rehabilitation of the resource.
So what is the abatement? The abatement of the rundownness of the
Yes.
house? Oh, okay.
Yes,
Yeah, it's a bit.
exactly,
yeah.
exactly
Not what
that.
I'm used to, but, okay.
So this is Chair Burdett. I'm a little confused. Is this particular property falling under properties for district court or for new enforcement actions?
So this is for properties for district court.
Okay.
So we asked the county to issue the notices against it in 2024, and we have the court, because there's been no action on it, we have the court date scheduled for next Tuesday.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So the next one at 1811 Brighton Dam Road, this is Prospect Hill. You all heard this as a preliminary consultation over the summer. There were 15 violations at the property. If you remember, there was a construction trailer, there was a whole list of outbuildings and siting and grade violations, fencing violations, all of that. That came to you all again, it was June, July of 2024, and there has been no movement from the property owner. So we are also seeking abatement in the district court and hoping to move forward with taking care of all of those violations soon. The next one we have is 7827 Hamden Lane in Bethesda, which was Dan's.
It was a fence. It was a fence installed without a hop. The HPC actually approved a hop with conditions for the fence on this site. This is one of those sort of corner properties in Greenwich Forest that sort of an oddball. So you identified conditions that would be acceptable and delegated final approval authority for a fence that satisfied those to us. It's complicated that the owner is in foreign service and there's a local property manager. This was complicated with producing service on the owner. So we're hearing this. We are also asking them to abate it and for a reasonable time frame to correct this, because, come on, it's been a really long time.
4 years?
3, I think.
4 years.
20, yeah, 2.5.
And this,
From the last time that we've been in
From the
communication.
hop was approved. Like
Yeah, from the
2
hop, it was, I think, 3 years.
Yeah.
yeah. This was the one where the owner, the property manager did the work without the owner's real understanding or
Well, I mean,
full knowledge?
it was the owner gave him the authority to do it, but part of the fence is also off the property in the right of way. So, I mean, let's fix that amongst other things. So, yeah, that we're asking the judge to issue an abatement order that they at least take the fence down within 30 or 45 days. And they have an approved hop, so they can come back with a fence that satisfies the criteria that you identified in that hop, and we as staff can approve that, approve the new fence. So hopefully that's the case. Again, the owner has been, I think, a little challenged because of the distance that they're away, and they can't participate remotely. So hopefully this will get resolved next week on Tuesday.
All right. The next one is 3820 Warner Street, Kensington, which is Laura's.
Right. Laura with the staff. This is for a property that you all reviewed HOP for back in October of 2024. This is where they had removed original window openings and installed kind of slightly wider but smaller vinyl windows, kind of modified the siding. Yeah, they're at the attic level. So you all denied that, and the applicants have been sort of, again, slowly working towards compliance and are, yeah.
This is Commissioner Pelletier. So they go to court and they get a ruling, right? And then what if they don't comply? Like what does this just continue to mount?
So if the judge says, if the judge grants the abatement and says you have 30 days to correct this, the judge can say you have longer. I mean, the judge can say whatever they want, but the judge will give a certain amount of time that it needs to be fixed, and then we'll set a new court date. We come back to court. If it's not fixed, then they're in contempt. And for each of these two, for abatement and for contempt, the judge can issue fines. Now, sometimes, I've seen it too where, the judge will say, we're levying a $500 fine, but you don't have to pay it now. I forget what the term is for that, if there is a term, but they'll put the fine aside and say, you need to come back and show this. But they'll be in contempt of court if they don't correct the violation. And then fines will continue to accrue and will keep coming back to court. I've never seen anybody put in jail for any of these violations, but I believe that is, ultimately a remedy.
Yeah, the last time that I was at court for a case, there was a not historic preservation case, but the judge did remind two people before him that prison could be the next jail, could be the next step in their nonconformity with previous rulings.
Well, so if they sell the house, if they don't comply, they don't fix anything, can they put the house up for sale and all this stuff kind of transfers with it, or?
If the house gets sold, so that's what happened with the Resin-Bowman farm. It was owned by a developer, and we entered an abatement order. And they sold it to that couple, and we entered an abatement order. They sold it to this new owner, we had to enter an abatement order. Every time the property transfers, the county has to reissue the notice and serve the new owner, and the whole thing starts again.
It can transfer.
It could, which is another reason we really try, even if people are working to come into compliance, we move as quickly as we can, because I've seen that a lot, where properties will just sell and we have to start all over again.
Interesting.
Now, if there is a judgment against the property, the title search that your title insurance company is supposed to do should find that there is an outstanding violation on the property that needs to be remedied. But that's on them, and that's not always the case. Now, there is one more that isn't on the list, Rebecca. 7209 MacArthur Boulevard.
Oh, right, I'm sorry. Yep.
Which is in Potomac Overlook, is also in violation. They painted their brick foundation despite the fact that the guidelines say don't do that. We are not asking for an abatement order because they are also on the March 26th HOP agenda. So hopefully we can get a well, I think we're going to be okay with them asking for a continuance for 60 days, 90 days, and hopefully the HOP will resolve this, and whatever corrective action the HPC finds will be sufficient, and they'll have a HOP for whatever is done to the house, and that will be no longer in violation.
So for some of these, for these new enforcement actions too, these might come to you as historic area work permits. So I do want to just be mindful of that and limit any conversation or anything that could be construed as deliberation about these items, since you'll be hearing a HOP on it, but I do want them to bring them to your attention. All right, so we have 201 Ethan Allen Road. We can just do a quick, I think, summary of what the new violation is for you guys. That one's yours. Isn't that the co-op?
Oh, yeah. How soon we forget. So,
There's so many.
yeah, the Silver Spring Co-op at 201 Ethan Allen, which is a commercial building, built, so that's in Tacoma Junction. No, the food co-op, the Silver Spring. Oh. Yeah, so the HPC approved a HOP for air conditioning units on the roof and a new compressor in the parking lot. And along with that, there was a chain link fence around the compressor. It's been particularly noisy, and they built a structure with a shed roof and T111 siding and asphalt shingles, none of which was permitted by either the HPC or DPS. So we actually have a meeting with DPS tomorrow to discuss this as well. So that will hopefully come back as a HOP for some sort of corrective action, but that was a recently issued notice of violation.
It's avenue, not road.
Thank you. I'll correct that. The next one we have is 26032 Frederick Road Clarksburg, which is in the Hyattstown district. This is your roof.
This one is for, it's a pretty simple roof replacement. There was a standing seam metal roof on a Gothic Revival house, and they have replaced it with just asphalt shingles. They needed a HOP for that.
Without a HOP, that one came in as a complaint. The next one is 23341 Frederick Road, Clarksburg. This is in the Clarksburg Historic District. So this was not a DPS pickup, it was a DHCA pickup for broken windows, peeling siding, missing siding, like building property maintenance code violations. So this one, we're going to be working with the owner to achieve compliance, hopefully without the historic area work permit. These are all rehab items that would qualify for the tax credit, so I'm working with them on that. And then the last one is 5419 Mohican Drive, Bethesda. This is Dan's.
So this is the new construction in the environmental setting of the R.A. Charles Castle, that's sort of between Mohican and MacArthur Boulevard. We were notified that some grading had occurred on the site that wasn't on their grading plan. So that needs to get resolved. That led to a site visit by me, and I identified several elements of the design that were not built per the drawings. So we'll be seeing that one again before too long. It is under new ownership, which is just a fact.
Is this the new house?
Yes.
Oh, do tell.
I'll show later.
Oh,
I
good.
won't tell. But the massing is like 98% accurate, maybe 95% accurate. Mostly it's fenestration.
Oh, wow. Whatever. Oh, no, go continue. I'll ask my question.
That was
after.
it. That was the last
I was
one.
going to ask about the MacArthur, the little grocery store restaurant Did that all ever get sorted
Oh,
out?
Bonfields.
Yeah, Bonfields,
Yeah,
yeah.
Wagshall's. Yes, you should go. It's
Okay.
wonderful. They've been open for at least a year now, because we did a whole division staff outing out there. The barbecue's great, the sandwiches are great. Yep, it turned out really wonderfully. It all looks exactly as it should in the back. They screened it, they painted it, they did it all.
So people do actually respond.
Well, that took a lot of follow-up too after the fact. I'll just say they didn't do it right the first or the fifth time. But we got them there. Yeah. Maybe. So those are all our updates for enforcement actions. So thank you for hanging in there with us through those. I know, especially at the end of the meeting, it can be a little bit much, but we want to keep you up to date with that. Our last staff item is that the University Boulevard Corridor Plan had their public hearing at the Planning Board, and we are moving towards topical work sessions on those. This is the master plan that has the designation of the Horad House as part of it. You guys heard that designation earlier in 2024, so the plan took a little while to get there. But we are looking at the historic preservation work session. Actually, it's going to take place on April 24th instead of March 27th. And I will give the chair the time for that as we get closer to it. And that concludes all of the staff updates. On April 24th, the Planning Board will be considering the designation of the Romeo and Elsie Sewell Horad House.
I have one question related to something we discussed lightly during the work session, but the Robert Llewellyn House, it sounded like the back deck replacement or repairs are going to be much more significant than what anybody ever originally thought. Are they going to need to come forward with a HOP at this point?
Only if they are going to alter the design or the materials of that back deck. If they're going to just rebuild it exactly as is, then no, they don't need a HOP. Even I think we had talked, Karen, like if they might need a bracket or some little things for like structural stability on the inside, that doesn't need a HOP. That's fine.
Okay. And again, are they doing anything on the rest of the wood on the house, on the front of the house, Commissioner Doman, or no, you don't know?
The intent is to redo all the woodwork.
Redo, so replace it or refinish it?
Refresh it. Paint it
Refresh it, okay.
seal it.
Yeah, okay. All right, so they don't really need to come to you at all with anything other than,
No, just make sure that they take really good before pictures so they can get their tax credit.
okay. Do they need to get a DPS permit?
I don't believe so, no, just for rebuilding a deck. in kind.
Rebuilding it, no.
Okay, all right. Let them know, I'll let them know to take lots of photographs in advance.
He should just check with DPS just to double check and make sure that they don't need a deck permit
Okay,
for that.
yeah.
Yep.
All right. And is that all we have then for tonight?
That's all from us.
We are adjourned.